The massive Zephyrian fleet moved through space like a dark cloud of death. General Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. His scaled hands gripped the command rail as he studied the readings from his sensors. The planet looked peaceful, almost too quiet for a world that supposedly held 50,000 human colonists. "General, we are approaching the outer defense perimeter," reported his aide, a young Zephyrian officer named Kexalon. "Our scouts report minimal resistance. A few patrol ships and some orbital defense platforms. Nothing our fleet cannot handle easily," Vextar nodded slowly. In his 40 years of military service, he had conquered dozens of worlds. The pattern was always the same. The primitive species would put up a brief fight, realize they were outmatched, and surrender. Then the Zephyrian Empire would add another world to its growing collection. The humans on this planet called New Denver would be no different. "Begin the assault," Vextar ordered. "Target their defensive positions first. I want this over quickly." The Zephyrian ships opened fire with their plasma cannons. Bright green beams lanced through space, striking the human orbital platforms. The platforms exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The few human patrol ships tried to fight back, but their weapons barely scratched the Zephyrian armor. Within minutes, the space around the planet belonged to the Empire. "Excellent," Vextar said. "Deploy the landing forces." 5,000 warriors should be more than enough to handle whatever ground forces they have. The dropships launched from the fleet, carrying Zephyrian soldiers toward the planet's surface. Each warrior wore powered armor that made them twice as strong as their natural bodies. Their weapons could melt through steel like butter. Against primitive humans, they would be unstoppable. Captain Jake Morrison crouched behind a concrete barrier, watching the alien ships descend through the atmosphere. His radio crackled with reports from his scattered forces. 200 soldiers spread across the entire colony. It was not nearly enough, but it was all they had. "All units, this is Morrison," he spoke into his radio. "Remember your training. These aliens think we're going to roll over and die. Let's show them what humans can do." The first Zephyrian dropship landed in the colony's main square. The ramp dropped and armored aliens poured out, their weapons already firing. The plasma bolts struck buildings and vehicles, setting everything ablaze. The aliens moved in perfect formation, just like their training manuals taught them. They did not expect the explosion that tore through their ranks. Sergeant Lisa Carter had spent 3 hours rigging improvised explosives under the square. When the aliens gathered in the center, she triggered the charges. The blast sent bodies flying and left a crater where the dropship had been. The surviving Zephyrians scattered, their perfect formation broken. "Target down," Carter reported over the radio. "One dropship destroyed, estimated 40 enemy casualties." Vextar stared at the reports coming in from the surface. One of his dropships was gone, completely destroyed. The humans had somehow anticipated where his forces would land and prepared a trap. This was not supposed to happen. "Send in the second wave," he ordered, "and tell them to be more careful." The second wave of Zephyrian forces landed at different points around the colony. They advanced more slowly, checking for traps and ambushes, but the humans seemed to be everywhere at once. A squad of aliens would clear a building only to find explosive charges waiting for them. They would secure a street only to have human snipers open fire from unexpected angles. Private First Class Tony Rodriguez had taken position on the roof of the colony's tallest building. His plasma rifle was an older model, nothing compared to the weapons the aliens carried. But Tony had something the aliens did not understand. He had grown up hunting in the forests of Earth. He knew how to wait, how to be patient, how to make every shot count. The Zephyrians tried to assault his building 3 times. Each time, Tony picked off their leaders and sent the rest running for cover. He had been holding that position for 6 hours now, and his ammunition was running low. But he would not give up. His friends were counting on him. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Morrison's voice came through the radio. "Still here, Captain," Tony replied, firing another shot that dropped a Zephyrian officer. "They keep coming, but they're not getting past me. Good man, hold as long as you can. Tony smiled grimly and lined up another shot. The aliens might have better weapons and armor, but they fought like machines. They followed their programming and never adapted. Humans were different. Humans could think, could improvise, could find a way to win even when everything seemed hopeless. The battle raged for 12 hours. The Zephyrians had expected to conquer the colony in 2 hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting house to house, building to building, against an enemy that refused to give up. Every human soldier seemed to fight with the strength of 10. When they ran out of ammunition, they used whatever they could find as weapons. When they were surrounded, they found ways to break through or take their enemies with them. Vexstar watched the casualty reports with growing alarm. His forces were winning, but at a terrible cost. He had started with 5,000 warriors. Now he had less than 3,000 still able to fight. The humans had started with only 200 soldiers, but they were making every life count. General, Kexalon reported, the northern sector has been secured. The human commander is requesting terms for surrender. Finally, Vexstar said, bring him to me. Captain Morrison was brought aboard the Zephyrian flagship under a flag of truce. He stood before General Vexstar without showing any fear, despite being surrounded by alien warriors. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he had a bandage around his left arm, but his eyes still held the fire of defiance. You have fought well, human, Vexstar said, but you have lost. Your colony belongs to the Empire now? Morrison looked at the alien general for a long moment. We didn't lose, General, we just ran out of time. What do you mean? Check your casualty reports. You came here with 5,000 soldiers. How many do you have left? Vexstar's scaled face darkened. The human was right. This had been the costliest battle in his military career. His forces had won, but they had paid a price that should have been impossible against such inferior numbers. You fight like beasts? Vexstar said. Morrison smiled coldly. No, General, we fight like humans. And this is just the beginning. The human captain was taken away to the prison cells, but his words echoed in Vexstar's mind. This was just the beginning. What did that mean? As he stood alone on his bridge, looking down at the burning colony, the general felt something he had never experienced before in 4 decades of conquest. He felt afraid. The emergency beacon from New Denver reached Earth faster than any ship could travel. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the war room of Terran Command, watching the holographic display that showed the attack on the colony. Her face was stone cold as she listened to the final transmission from Captain Morrison before the signal went dark. Ladies and gentlemen, she said to the assembled officers, we are now at war. The room exploded into activity. Orders flew across communication channels to every corner of human space. Within 1 hour, every military base in the solar system was mobilizing. Within 6 hours, the first wave of ships was launching from Earth's orbital shipyards. Within 12 hours, Admiral Sullivan had assembled the largest fleet in human history. 200 ships of war hung in space around Earth like a steel constellation. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and carriers formed up in perfect formation. Each ship carried soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The crews worked with efficiency that would have impressed even the Zephyrians, but there was something else in their movements. There was anger. Admiral, the fleet is ready, reported Commander Pete Jackson, Sullivan's second in command. All ships report full combat readiness. Sullivan nodded as she studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet was still at New Denver, probably thinking they had won an easy victory. They had no idea what was coming for them. Send a message to all ship captains, she ordered. Tell them we have one job. We bring our people home, and we make these aliens regret ever hearing the word human. The message went out across the fleet, and on every ship, the crews felt their hearts burn with determination. They had families on those colonies. They had friends who might be dead or captured. The Zephyrians had started this war, but the humans would finish it. Colonel Rick Barnes stood in the briefing room of the stealth ship Phantom, addressing his special operations team. The Ghost Battalion was the most elite unit in the human military. They specialized in missions that other soldiers called impossible. Today, they would prove that nothing was impossible for humans who refused to quit. Our job is simple, Barnes told his men. We hit 12 different Zephyrian outposts at the same time. We make them think we have an army when we only have 30. Soldiers, we cause chaos, confusion, and fear. We show them that humans can be anywhere, anytime. The soldiers nodded grimly. They had trained for years to become living weapons. Each man could fight like 10 normal soldiers. But more importantly, they fought like humans. They adapted, improvised, and never gave up. Remember, Barnes continued, we are not just fighting for victory, we are fighting for our people. Every Zephyrian we stop here is one less threat to human colonies everywhere. The Ghost Battalion dispersed to their ships, ready to spread across the galaxy like shadows. They would strike fast, hard, and without mercy. The aliens would learn that. Attacking humans had consequences. General, Vexstar received the first reports while his fleet was still orbiting New Denver. Zephyrian outposts across 3 star systems were under attack. The reports made no sense. How could the humans have moved so fast? How could they be attacking so many places at once? General, his intelligence officer reported, we are intercepting human communications. They seem to be coordinating a massive military response. Vexstar studied the intercepted messages. The humans spoke in codes, but what he could understand chilled him. They were not panicking or afraid. They were organizing with mechanical precision, but underneath the military language, he could hear something else. They were angry. One message came through clearly. It was from a human commander named Amy Foster, broadcasting to all human forces in the area. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was ice in her words. This is Lieutenant Commander Foster to all units. The aliens wanted a war. They attacked our people, our families, our home. Now they will learn what happens when you threaten humanity. Show them no mercy. Show them what humans can do when we fight for everything we love. Vexstar felt his scales shiver. In all his years of conquest, he had never heard such cold determination. In an enemy's voice, the humans were not just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for something much more dangerous. They were fighting for each other. The first major engagement happened at the Titan Prime mining station. Captain Danny Murphy commanded a small garrison of 50 Marines when 3 Zephyrian ships arrived to secure the facility. The aliens expected another easy victory like New Denver. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Murphy's Marines had turned the entire mining complex into a fortress. Every corridor was a killing zone. Every room contained hidden explosives. The Zephyrians advanced slowly, losing soldiers to traps and ambush at every turn. They thought they were winning when they finally cornered the humans in the main mining chamber. Surrender, humans, the Zephyrian commander broadcast. You are surrounded. You cannot win. Murphy's response came back immediately. We already won. We just made sure you can't use this place against other humans. The mining station exploded in a blast that could be seen from orbit. Murphy and his Marines had rigged the entire facility with explosives, turning it into a massive bomb. The Zephyrian command center, located in the station's main hub, was completely destroyed. 3 alien ships were caught in the blast zone and torn apart. 50 human Marines had died, but they had taken over 2,000 Zephyrians with them. More importantly, they had sent a message. Humans would rather die than let their enemies win. The news of Titan Prime spread through both fleets instantly. The Zephyrians were shocked by the humans' willingness to sacrifice themselves. The humans were inspired by their comrades' heroism. The psychological war had begun, and the humans were winning. Staff Sergeant Kelly Wright commanded a squad of 12 soldiers aboard the dropship Vengeance. Their mission was supposed to be a routine evacuation of civilians from the planet Kepler 186F. Instead, they found themselves facing a full Zephyrian assault force. Wright's squad was outnumbered 50-1. Any sane commander would have retreated. Instead, Wright looked at the terrified civilians behind her and made a decision that would define the rest of the war. Paint the words on the hull, she ordered her soldiers. Make sure the aliens can read them. Her soldiers used their plasma torches to burn words into the metal hull of their ship. The message was simple and direct. Welcome to hell. Rights. SQUAD held their position for 6 hours against impossible odds. They used every trick they knew and invented new ones on the spot. When they ran out of ammunition, they used alien weapons. When those broke, they used their fists. When the aliens finally overran their position, they found that every human had died defending the civilians, but the civilians were safe. All 300 of them had been evacuated while Wright's squad bought them time with their lives. The Zephyrians had won the battle, but they had learned something terrifying. Humans would fight to the death for complete strangers. General Vextar studied the battle reports with growing unease. His forces were winning most of the engagements, but the cost was enormous. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied all military logic. They treated every battle like it was the most important fight in the galaxy. General, his aide reported, we have captured several human soldiers. The interrogation teams are ready to begin questioning them. Vextar nodded. Perhaps he could learn something about human psychology that would help him understand this strange enemy. As he walked toward the prison cells, he wondered if he truly wanted to know what drove these creatures to fight so desperately. The war was just beginning, and already Vextar was beginning to suspect that his empire had made a terrible mistake. The fortress of Zarketh had never been taken by enemy forces. Built into the side of a mountain on the planet Zarian 7, it was considered the most secure military installation in the Zephyrian Empire. The walls were made of reinforced metal that could withstand orbital bombardment. The defenses included energy shields, automated turrets, and a garrison of 5,000 elite warriors. General Vextar himself had declared it impregnable. Major Alex Thompson studied the fortress through his binoculars from 5 miles away. His strike team consisted of only 20 soldiers, all volunteers for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The fortress held critical intelligence about Zephyrian military plans, intelligence that could save millions of human lives. Someone had to get inside and destroy it. Sir, the assault teams are in position, reported Sergeant Mike Davis. But I have to ask, how exactly are we supposed to get through those defenses? Thompson lowered his binoculars and smiled grimly. We don't go through them, Sergeant, we go around them. The plan was insane by any military standard. Thompson's team would scale the sheer cliff face on the backside of the mountain, a wall of rock that the Zephyrians considered unclimbable. They would infiltrate the fortress through maintenance tunnels that were too small for armored aliens to use. Then they would plant explosives in the central command center and fight their way out. Remember, Thompson told his team, we're not trying to survive this mission, we're trying to complete it. There's a difference. The climb took 8 hours. The human soldiers moved like spiders up the rock face using ropes and climbing gear to ascend the impossible cliff. 3 times, Zephyrian patrol ships passed overhead, but the humans remained perfectly still against the dark rock. Their camouflage and discipline kept them invisible. When they reached the maintenance tunnels, the real challenge began. The tunnels were narrow, barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. The Zephyrians had never considered that anyone would try to infiltrate their fortress this way. The tunnels were unguarded and led directly into the heart of the facility. Thompson's team moved through the darkness like ghosts. They had memorized every turn, every junction, every possible route to their target. When they finally emerged inside the fortress, they found themselves in the central command center, surrounded by alien computers and tactical displays. Plant the charges, Thompson whispered. We have 10 minutes before the patrols come back. The explosives were set with military precision. Each charge was placed to cause maximum damage to the fortress's critical systems. The team worked in perfect silence, communicating with hand signals and shared understanding born from years of training together. Then the alarms started. Screaming, a Zephyrian technician had discovered the sabotage. Within seconds, the fortress was in full alert. Armored warriors poured into the command center from every entrance. Thompson's team was completely surrounded. "Sir, we're trapped," Davis reported, firing his rifle at the advancing aliens. "There's no way out." Thompson activated the detonator in his hand. "There doesn't need to be." The explosion tore through the heart of the fortress. The command center vaporized in a ball of fire that consumed everything within 100 meters. The blast shattered the mountain itself, sending avalanches of rock cascading down the slopes. When the smoke cleared, the impregnable fortress of Zarkith was nothing but rubble. 20 human soldiers had died, but they had destroyed the most important military installation in the Zephyrian Empire. The intelligence data was gone, the defensive systems were ruined, and 5,000 alien warriors lay buried under tons of rock. General Vexstar received the report while reviewing casualty lists from other battles. The fortress of Zarkith, which had stood for 200 years, had been destroyed by a handful of human soldiers. It was impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans had done the impossible again. "How?" he asked his aide. "How did they even get inside?" "The investigation team found evidence of infiltration through the maintenance tunnels," the aide reported. "The humans climbed the cliff face and crawled through passages that our own engineers said were too small for combat operations." Vexstar stared at the report in disbelief. The humans had attempted something that no sane military commander would ever consider. They had succeeded through pure determination and a willingness to sacrifice everything for their mission. On the planet Meridian 9, Corporal Maria Santos was fighting for her life in the ruins of a human settlement. The Zephyrians had attacked, without warning, overwhelming the small garrison with superior numbers and firepower. Maria's squad had been cut off from the main force, and was slowly being pushed back toward the settlement's edge. The alien plasma bolt took her left arm off at the shoulder. Maria screamed in pain and rage, but she did not fall. Instead, she grabbed her severed arm with her remaining hand and swung it like a club at the Zephyrian warrior who had shot her. The alien, confused by this insane response, hesitated for a crucial second. Maria used that hesitation to draw her sidearm and put 3 bullets through his skull. "Santos, you're hit!" shouted Private Ben Carter, rushing to help her. "I'm fine," Maria snarled, using her good hand to tie a tourniquet around her shoulder. "Just a scratch." She continued fighting for another 2 hours, using her injury as both a weapon and a psychological tool. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. They began to fear this human who fought with the fury of a wounded animal, who turned her own pain into a source of strength. Private Jim Nelson was assigned to escort duty when the evacuation order came. His job was to help wounded soldiers reach the extraction point 18 miles away through hostile territory. When he arrived at the medical station, he found Lieutenant Sarah Brooks unconscious and badly injured. "She's not going to make it," the medic told him. "Her injuries are too severe for transport." Nelson looked at the unconscious officer and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Then I'll carry her." For 18 miles, through forests filled with alien patrols and across rivers swollen with radioactive runoff, Nelson carried Lieutenant Brooks on his back. When Zephyrian scouts spotted them, he fought them off with one hand while supporting her with the other. When his legs gave out from exhaustion, he crawled. When his strength failed completely, he found more strength somewhere inside himself. He refused 3 separate offers of evacuation, insisting that medics take other wounded soldiers first. He would not leave without Sarah Brooks, and he would not let her die on his watch. When they finally reached the extraction point, Nelson had been walking for 26 hours straight. His feet were bloody, his back was screaming with pain, and he had taken 2 minor wounds from alien weapons. But Sarah Brooks was alive. "Why?" she asked him later when she had recovered enough to speak. "Why did you risk everything for me?" Nelson looked at her with tired eyes. "Because you're one of us. We don't leave our people behind." The story spread through both armies like wildfire. The humans talked about heroes and sacrifice, about soldiers who went beyond duty to protect their comrades. The Zephyrians talked about madness and impossible determination, about an enemy that refused to follow the rules of warfare. Captain Steve Parker led the rescue mission to Prison Planet. Kappa 7. The Zephyrians had captured 300 human civilians and were using them as forced labor in mining operations. Parker's orders were clear: extract as many civilians as possible, but preserve his forces for future operations. Parker ignored his orders. With only 50 soldiers, he launched a full assault on the prison complex. The attack was tactically unsound, strategically risky, and completely against military doctrine. It was also completely successful. Parker's forces hit the prison from 6 different directions simultaneously. They moved with precision and fury, cutting through alien defenses like a blade through cloth. When the Zephyrians tried to use the civilians as human shields, Parker's soldiers showed them what real marksmanship looked like. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Parker had lost 45 of his 50 soldiers, but all 300 civilians were free and safe. The prison complex was destroyed and the Zephyrian guards were dead. Mission accomplished, Parker reported to his superiors. All civilians recovered. At what cost? Came the reply. Parker looked at his 5 surviving soldiers and smiled. At the only cost that matters. We brought our people home. General Vexstar studied the psychological profile reports his scientists had compiled about human behavior. The conclusions were disturbing. Humans seemed to operate on emotional principles that defied military logic. They fought harder when outnumbered, showed mercy to defeated enemies, and displayed loyalty that bordered on the supernatural. They are not rational, his chief psychologist reported. They make decisions based on concepts like honor and duty that have no tactical value. They sacrifice strategic advantages for emotional satisfaction. Vexstar nodded slowly, and yet they are winning. The psychologist had no answer for that. The humans were winning because they fought like no other species the Empire had ever encountered. They turned their weaknesses into strengths and their defeats into victories. They were, as Vexstar had said before, absolute beasts, but as he studied the reports, the general was beginning to suspect that there was something more to human. General Vexstar walked through the detention level of his flagship with slow, measured steps. The Zephyrian Empire had taken hundreds of human prisoners during the ongoing war, but Vexstar had never bothered to speak with them personally. Today was different. Today he needed to understand what drove these creatures to fight with such impossible determination. The first cell contained Captain Chris Baker, a human officer captured during the battle for Proxima Station. Baker had continued fighting even after taking 3 plasma wounds, only surrendering when his ammunition ran out completely. He sat on the metal bench in his cell, looking calm despite his injuries. "Captain Baker," Vexstar said through the force field that separated them, "I want to ask you some questions." Baker looked up at the alien general with steady eyes. "I'm required to give you my name, rank, and service number, nothing else." "I am not interested in military secrets," Vexstar replied. "I want to understand why you fight the way you do. Your tactics make no sense. You sacrifice strategic advantages for emotional reasons. You throw away lives that could be used more effectively elsewhere." Baker was quiet for a long moment, studying the alien commander. Finally, he spoke. "You fight for conquest. We fight for each other. That's the difference. Explain." "When I see a fellow soldier in danger, I don't calculate the tactical value of saving him. I don't weigh the cost against the benefit. I act because he's my brother, and brothers don't abandon each other." Vexstar's scaled brow furrowed. "But this is inefficient. Your emotional attachments make you weak." Baker smiled coldly. "Then why are you losing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vexstar had no answer. By every military measure, the Zephyrian Empire should have crushed humanity weeks ago. Instead, the war was turning into a grinding stalemate that favored the humans more. Each day, in the next cell, Sergeant First Class Nancy Turner sat in meditation pose despite her obvious injuries. She had been captured after holding a strategic bridge for 6 days against overwhelming odds. The Zephyrian interrogation teams had worked on her for weeks, trying to extract information about human defensive positions. They had gotten nothing, Sergeant Turner, Vexstar said. My interrogators tell me you have endured considerable pain without revealing any information. Why do you suffer when you could simply answer their questions and end your torment? Nancy opened her eyes and looked at the general. Her face was bruised and scarred, but her eyes held no fear. Because my friends are counting on me. Your friends may already be dead. Your sacrifice may be meaningless. It doesn't matter. They trusted me to keep their secrets, and I will, even if it kills me. Vexstar studied her face, searching for signs of doubt or weakness. He found none. This human was prepared to die rather than betray her comrades. It was a level of loyalty that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The third prisoner was different. Corporal Doug Martinez had been captured while defending a civilian evacuation point. Unlike the others, he seemed eager to talk. When Vexstar approached his cell, Martinez stood up immediately. General, I've been hoping to speak with someone in authority, Martinez said. I have information that might interest you. Vexstar felt a moment of satisfaction. Finally, a human who understood the reality of his situation. What kind of information? Information about human defensive positions, troop movements, supply lines. Everything you need to win this war quickly. And what do you want in return? Martinez looked directly into Vexstar's eyes. I want you to let the civilians from Evacuation Point Charlie go free. 300 people, mostly women and children. Let them go, and I'll tell you everything. Vexstar realized he had misunderstood. This human was not betraying his people. He was trying to trade military secrets for civilian lives. Even in captivity, even facing torture and death, he was still trying to protect others. You would sacrifice military advantages to save strangers? Vexstar asked. They're not strangers. They're humans. That makes them family. The general left the detention level more confused than when he had entered. The human prisoners had not given him the insight he sought. Instead, they had presented him with a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. How could a species that prioritized emotion over logic be winning a war against the most powerful military force in the galaxy? Dr. Zexanal, the Empire's chief psychologist, had been studying captured human soldiers for months. His laboratory was filled with monitoring equipment and psychological analysis tools. When Vexstar arrived, the doctor was reviewing brain scans of human prisoners under stress. What have you learned? Vexstar asked. Disturbing things, General, the doctor replied. Human brain chemistry is unlike anything we have encountered. When they are in combat situations, their bodies produce chemicals that enhance their physical abilities and reduce their perception of pain. But more importantly, when they are fighting to protect others, these chemical levels increase dramatically. You mean they become stronger when fighting for their comrades? Precisely. Their emotional bonds actually improve their combat effectiveness. It defies everything we know about military psychology. Vexstar studied the brain scans on the doctor's display. The human neural patterns showed activity in regions that most species used for survival instincts. But in humans, these same regions activated when they thought about protecting others. There is something else, the doctor continued. We tested their endurance under various conditions. When fighting for personal survival, humans perform within normal parameters for their species. But when they believe they are protecting others, their endurance increases by an average of 300%. 300%. The test subjects would literally fight until their hearts stopped rather than allow harm to come to their fellow prisoners. We had to end the experiments before we killed them all. Vexstar felt his blood run cold. The humans were not just emotionally driven. Their emotions were making them into superior warriors. Their greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength. Meanwhile, the war continued to rage across a dozen star systems. Major Kevin Hart led the human counteroffensive that recaptured the Centauri colonies in a lightning campaign that stunned Zephyrian strategists. His forces moved with coordination that seemed impossible for separate units operating across vast distances. Hart's soldiers anticipated each other's actions as if they shared a single mind. When one unit encountered heavy resistance nearby, forces would automatically adjust their routes to provide support. When supplies ran low, other units would share their resources without being asked. The humans fought like a single organism with thousands of parts. How do they coordinate so effectively? Vexstar demanded of his intelligence officers. We intercept their communications. We know they cannot be sharing tactical information fast enough to account for this level of coordination. We believe it is intuitive, General, his intelligence chief reported. They seem to understand each other without needing explicit communication. Their shared culture and values allow them to predict how their comrades will react in any given situation. On the dead world of Kepler 438b, Captain. Lauren Bell's unit had been stranded for 3 weeks without hope of rescue. The planet had no atmosphere and no resources. Her 50 soldiers should have been planning for inevitable death. Instead, Bell received reports that her people were preparing for offensive operations against nearby Zephyrian positions. Captain, with respect, we have no way off this rock, said Lieutenant Frank Rodriguez. Shouldn't we be conserving our strength? Bell looked at the tactical display showing enemy positions. Frank, we're going to die here anyway. The question is whether we die accomplishing something useful or we die waiting for a miracle. What do you have in mind? There's a Zephyrian supply depot on the moon of this planet. They think they're safe because nobody can survive on this world long enough to threaten them. Let's prove them wrong. Bell's soldiers spent 2 days rigging their remaining explosives into improvised rocket propulsion systems. Using their powered armor as makeshift spacecraft, they launched themselves across the vacuum toward the enemy moon. Half of them died during the flight, but the survivors landed directly on top of the supply depot. The attack was so unexpected that the Zephyrian defenders were overwhelmed in minutes. Bell's remaining soldiers destroyed supplies that would have supported enemy operations for months. When reinforcements arrived, they found a message painted on the depot walls. Humans were here. Bell and her soldiers died fighting, but their sacrifice crippled Zephyrian logistics in that entire sector. 25 humans had destroyed resources worth millions of credits and set back enemy operations by months, Vexstar read the report, while standing on the observation deck of his flagship. Through the viewport, he could see stars that had once belonged to the Empire. Now many of them were contested or completely under human control. The tide of war was turning, and he was beginning to understand why. General, his aide approached carefully, the High Command is demanding an explanation for our recent defeats. They want to know why our superior forces cannot overcome these primitive humans. Vexstar continued staring at the stars. Tell them the truth. Tell them we are not fighting primitives. We are fighting something we have never encountered before. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship Defiance, watching the final preparations for Operation Homecoming. The largest human fleet ever assembled stretched out before her like a sea of steel and fire. 500 ships of war hung in formation, each one carrying soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Today, humanity would strike at the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. Admiral, all fleet elements report ready, Commander Pete Jackson announced. The Ghost Fleet is in position for the opening strike. Long-range reconnaissance confirms minimal enemy presence in the outer system. Sullivan nodded as she studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian homeworld of Zephyr Prime lay 3 jumps ahead, protected by massive defensive fleets and orbital fortresses. Intelligence suggested the planet held over 50 billion aliens and served as the command center for their entire military operation. Taking it would end the war. Signal all ships, Sullivan ordered. Today we finish what they started. Today we show them what happens when you threaten humanity. The human fleet jumped into hyperspace in perfect coordination. Each ship knew its role, each captain understood the plan, and every soldier aboard felt the weight of their species' future on their shoulders. They were not just fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for the right of humanity to exist in a galaxy that had tried to destroy them. Colonel Janet Pierce commanded the 3rd Battle Group, a collection of destroyers and cruisers that formed the fleet's advanced strike force. Her Ships were older than the Zephyrian vessels they would face, armed with weapons that were less advanced than alien technology. But Pierce had something the enemy lacked. She had crews that refused to accept defeat. "All ships, this is Pierce," she broadcast to her battle group. "Remember what we learned at Titan Prime, at Kepler 438b. At every battle where humans proved the impossible was just another word for difficult. We don't need better ships. We need better hearts." The first engagement happened at the edge of the Zephyr system. The Zephyrian 6th Fleet, 150 ships strong, moved to intercept the human advance. Admiral Kethver, commanding the alien fleet, felt confident in his numerical advantage and superior firepower. He had studied human tactics and believed he understood their weaknesses. He was wrong. Pierce's 70 ships hit the Zephyrian fleet like a storm of controlled fury. Instead of the predictable frontal assault the aliens expected, the humans split into multiple attack groups that struck from 6 different directions simultaneously. Each group moved with precision that seemed impossible for ships operating in the chaos of battle. "Target their command vessels first," Pierce ordered. "Cut off their coordination and watch them fall apart." The human ships dove through the Zephyrian formation like sharks attacking a school of fish. Their weapons might have been older, but their targeting was perfect and their timing was flawless. Within the first 10 minutes of battle, Pierce's forces had destroyed 5 Zephyrian command ships and scattered the enemy fleet into confused fragments. Admiral Kethver watched his perfectly organized fleet dissolve into chaos and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The humans were not just fighting with superior tactics. They were fighting with a unity of purpose that made their entire fleet function like a single weapon. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship," he ordered desperately. "If we can destroy their command structure, perhaps we can break their coordination." 50 Zephyrian ships turned their weapons on Pierce's destroyer Relentless. The ship vanished in a storm of plasma fire and energy beams. For a moment, Kethver felt hope. Surely the loss of their commander would throw the humans into confusion. Instead, the human fleet's attacks became even more coordinated. Without missing a beat, Captain Helen Ross of the cruiser Determination took command of the battle group. The transition was so smooth that the Zephyrians barely noticed it had happened. "This is Ross to all ships," came the calm voice over the communication channels. "Janet showed us the way. Now let's finish what she started." The battle raged for 6 hours. When it ended, the Zephyrian 6th Fleet no longer existed. 70 human ships had destroyed 150 alien vessels through superior coordination, tactical flexibility, and sheer determination. Pierce had died with her ship, but her sacrifice had opened the path to the Zephyrian homeworld. Master Sergeant Carl Rogers was leading his squad through the industrial district of Zephyr Prime when the impossible happened. A Zephyrian plasma cannon, designed to destroy armored vehicles, scored a direct hit on his position. The blast should have vaporized him instantly. Instead, Rogers rolled out of the crater, his armor smoking but his body intact. "Sarge, how are you still alive?" asked Private Billy Carter, staring at the massive crater where Rogers had been standing. "Because I'm too stubborn to die," Rogers replied, checking his weapon. "And because our people are counting on us." The squad continued their advance through the alien city. Every building was a fortress, every street was a battleground, and every alien civilian was a potential threat. But Rogers and his soldiers moved through the urban warfare like they had been born for it. They adapted to each new challenge, improvised solutions to impossible problems, and never stopped pushing forward. Lieutenant Michelle Adams flew her damaged fighter through the orbital defense grid around Zephyr Prime with skill that bordered on supernatural. Her ship had lost half its engines, her navigation systems were failing, and her cockpit was filled with smoke from electrical fires. Any sane pilot would have ejected hours ago. "Control, this is Adams," she reported over the radio. "I'm making my attack run on the primary shield generator." "Adams, your ship is falling apart," came the reply from the carrier. "Abort the mission and return to base." "Negative, Control. One more run and I can take out their shields." The ground forces are counting on orbital support. Adams dove her crippled fighter through a maze of defensive fire that should have been impossible to navigate. Her instruments were dead, her engines were failing, and she was flying on pure instinct and determination. When she reached the shield generator, she released her last torpedo and watched it streak toward the target. The explosion lit up the planet's atmosphere like a second sun. The orbital shields collapsed, leaving the surface open to bombardment. From the human fleet, Adams tried to pull her fighter out of the dive, but her engines finally gave out. She rode her ship down like a meteor, dying in the moment of her greatest victory. General Vexstar stood in his command bunker deep beneath the surface of Zephyr Prime, watching his world die around him. Human forces were advancing through every major city, their ships controlled the orbital space, and his own soldiers were beginning to question orders. The war was lost, and he knew it. "General," his aide reported, "Admiral Sullivan is requesting a meeting under flag of truce. She says she has terms for our surrender?" Vexstar closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his empire's defeat. "Tell her I will meet with her." The meeting took place in the ruins of the Imperial Senate building. Admiral Sullivan arrived with a small escort, showing no fear despite being surrounded by potentially hostile aliens. She walked into the chamber. Like she owned it, her presence commanding respect even from her enemies. "General Vexstar," she said simply. "You know why I'm here." "Yes," Vexstar replied. "You have come to accept our surrender." "Actually, I've come to offer you terms. Your empire is finished, but your people don't have to be." Vexstar looked at her in surprise. "You would show mercy to those who attacked your colonies?" Sullivan's expression was hard but not cruel. "We don't fight because we hate what's in front of us, General. We fight because we love what's behind us. Your people made a mistake, but that doesn't mean they all have to die for it." "I do not understand." "You have the power to destroy us completely. Why would you choose otherwise?" "Because that's what makes us human. We fight with everything we have when threatened, but we also know when to stop fighting. Victory without honor is just another form of defeat." Vexstar studied the human admiral for a long moment. Throughout the war he had called her people beasts, savages, creatures driven by animal instinct. Now he began to understand how wrong he had been. "What are your terms?" he asked. "Complete disarmament of your military forces, reparations for the colonies you attacked, and a treaty that guarantees you will never again threaten human worlds. And in return? In return, we help you rebuild. We share technology that will improve life for your people. We show you that there are better ways to expand than through conquest." Vexstar felt something crack inside his chest. Pride, perhaps, or the certainty he had carried his entire life that strength came only through domination. "You would help those who tried to destroy you?" Sullivan nodded. "It's what we do. We fight our enemies until they surrender, then we turn them into friends. It's worked pretty well for us so far." The surrender ceremony took place 3 days later. Vexstar stood before the assembled representatives of both species and formally ended the war that had cost millions of lives. As he handed over his ceremonial sword to Admiral Sullivan, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "I called your people beasts," he said. "I was wrong. You are something far more dangerous and far more admirable.